I endured years of humiliation as the backbone of the family, but the day my son's graduation was announced, they stabbed me in the back by demanding I hand over the estate so my husband could move his mistress in. I stood at the kitchen island with his demand on my phone while mirrors of my own life echoed. Every unpaid thank you, every unreturned kindness, every time I swallowed my voice for the sake of peace. In my head, I smile because they do not know the truth. The estate, the trust, the deed, they are all under my name. I have been quietly unspooling a safety net while they unstitched my dignity. I will not cry. I will not beg. I will perform a gentle, surgical undoing of everything they built on my back. My name is Maya Thompson, and I am 42 years old. Before I reveal exactly how I walked away with everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe toxic people always get what they deserve. But to understand how they ended up with absolutely nothing, we have to go back to a life built on gentle labor and silent strength. People love to call me the glue. At church, they said, Maya holds us together. In the house, I held dinners, tax forms, the kids' schedules, and a smile that never cracked. Marcus, my husband, wore suits that said success and drove a car that said status. But the checks I wrote paid the school fees, the mortgage when his clients were late, and the designer bags that fulfilled a social persona he could not finance himself. It started small. A favor here. Marcus asked me to cover a month when a contractor bounced a payment. A gift here. Yvonne, my mother-in-law, borrowed $10 for an emergency and never returned it. Zoe, my daughter, would roll her eyes at my thrift store dresses and encourage me to step up my wardrobe for the family's profile photos. Every compliment was a request in disguise. My spiritual discipline, my morning prayers, my church volunteer hours, the way I forgave was interpreted as weakness. They mistook my gentleness for an account they could draw from. I kept my calm because I believed in the power of patience. I watched them hum and preen at galas, listened to their whispered plans of moving to a better neighborhood, and I nodded. At night, when the house fell quiet and Marcus snored like a man who had never had to wonder where the next mortgage check was coming from, I sat with my laptop and a cup of chamomile. That laptop was my altar and my weapon. At 2 a.m., while family photos slept on the mantel and the dog curled at my feet, I became properly dangerous. The truth I kept hidden. The old Thompson estate on Maple had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother, Elsie May, had been a woman who taught me how to pray and how to plan. When she got sick, she called me into her small hospital room and said, "Child, never let your kindness be your bondage. Build a line people can't cross." I took that to heart. Quietly, over a decade, I rearranged the paperwork, irrevocable trust here, a transfer of beneficial interest there, a subtle title adjustment filed with the county recorder while Marcus watched sports and Yvonne baked pies for the church. I did not flaunt the documents. I did not wave them in anyone's face. I wanted to see who would love me for the woman I was, not the woman who paid. I wanted to test loyalty, and if they failed, the law would do the talking. The daily disrespect became an ache. Marcus would sign his name on the guest list of an event we were paying for and later scold me for being stingy when I suggested a smaller brand of champagne. Yvonne would tease me in front of company about being sentimental when I insisted we keep the family portraits. Zoe joined in, calling me old school when I preserved family recipes. Even Jamal, my son, breathed into the same air of entitlement. He was still a child in many ways, but he repeated the household chorus, "Mom, we're fine. Don't worry." So I worried. I planned. I prayed. I drafted revocable documents and slowly turned them to instruments that could not be hijacked. Not because I wanted to trap them, because I wanted to protect the legacy of a woman who taught me to make a plan. I kept wearing kindness like a coat, I would set out polished silver for dinner parties while my stomach tightened at how often my name was used to secure credit applications. I funded college tours and extracurriculars and still made time to sit with the elderly neighbor and read aloud from scripture. The household operated as though my labor was endless. They believed my forgiveness was infinite. That was their mistake. Greed is sly in a family. It begins with an offhand remark and grows teeth. It was a Tuesday when Marcus dropped his plan on the table like a folded napkin, casual, thoughtless, a demand disguised as a favor. "You're going to need to sign to release the property, Maya," Marcus said one morning over eggs that I cooked because he had missed another business call. "I've found someone who can give me what I deserve. A fresh start. We can renovate the guest wing, make this place a showpiece. Help me move her in, and I'll clear your name on the accounts. I'll make it right." He said it like he was offering me a courtesy. I felt the words like a slap. Not a single please, not an ounce of gratitude for the years I carried him while he borrowed status and never built substance. Yvonne clucked in the background about appearances and grandchildren being the key to social standing. Zoe chimed in that women like new things, and Jamal frowned but did not protest. They had a plan. The plan smelled like desperation. Sell houses in the family portfolio, pressure me to sign an amendment to the trust, an amendment Marcus had drafted with the help of a flamboyant attorney he met at a country club brunch, the kind of man who used assets as a flirtation. They wanted to make the Maple Street estate liquid, then use the money to fund a lifestyle that was beyond their means. They did not realize how naked their greed sounded to me. They thought the gentle woman who hummed hymnals while folding their shirts wouldn't notice the lines Marcus had been crossing, checks made out to unfamiliar accounts, late-night calls with promising investors, Yvonne's unexplained jewelry sales. They assumed spiritual grace equals passivity. One Sunday, while they paused in the living room taking selfies in front of the fireplace, Marcus adjusting a silk scarf he could not have afforded without my help, I overheard two hushed voices plotting the final step. An intervention where I would be presented with an ultimatum. Sign here, sign now, or we relocate the home office, place the house on the market, and exploit a clause that would allow them to argue undue influence. The word undue hung in the air like a dare. If they had merely spoken aloud and gone downstairs, it would have been easier. But families fold into conspiracies with such deftness. They draw paper boundaries and decide who gets the corners. That night, I let the hurt deepen into a still, bright resolve. I began mapping the legal angles in my head. What documents needed permanent labels? What signatures to notarize? What accounts needed restrictive covenants? I began counting days until graduation because this family loved spectacle. Their greatest hunger was for public validation. That would be their undoing. I listened as the plan grew teeth. Marcus and Yvonne picked a gathering, Jamal's graduation party, a public event with cousins flying in and the town's social circle present. They imagined the drama of me being moved to sign papers in front of everyone, humiliation staged as a negotiation. They wanted me quiet. They wanted the cameras to record a woman who couldn't keep up. They would toast the new era with my permission. They never asked themselves why I had been so patient. They never considered that patience can be a strategy. They never guessed that a woman who can hold a family together through decades of entitlement could also hold the legal title and the quiet will to unmake their plans. I will not pretend it was easy. The counterplan needed finesse. I could have stormed into their lives with a lawyer every day at dawn, but that would have been noisy and petty. I wanted to be elegant. I wanted it to feel like the natural order of things reasserting itself, quiet, lawful, undeniable. So I set my trap with the patience of prayer and the precision of a practiced mind. I updated the trust. I converted revocable accounts into an irrevocable trust titled Thompson Family Legacy Trust. listing myself as trustee and including specific clauses that protected the estate from involuntary sale without a unanimous family consent and a judicial review in the case of alleged undue influence. I filed recorded deeds in the county clerk's office that required a trustee's certification for any transaction concerning the Maple Street property. I arranged with my bank to flag suspicious disbursements and set up a secondary audit, something Marcus never noticed because he never looked beyond the surface of things. I hired an auditor with a gentle voice named Desmond, recommended by a friend who owed me nothing but respected the work. Desmond's reports began to quietly illuminate patterns. Consistent withdrawals under consulting, transfers to shell entities, and payments to a lifestyle account with no clear business justification. My quiet audit was like a slow river eroding a bluff. It carved out the truth without splashing. At the same time, I acted like nothing had changed in the household. I kept the plates warm. I pretended not to notice the new perfume on Marcus's collar. I made an appointment with a notary public and had documents notarized that would protect my position. I called the title office twice, once to confirm the recorded covenant, and once to ensure that any attempted change would require a trustee affirmation. I established an emergency power of attorney clause that only triggered in the event of my incapacity, which I never intended to use, but which added an additional layer of protection. Late at night, I typed. My fingers moved like a quiet machine. Letters of instruction, a sealed affidavit, the draft of a public statement to be used if forced into the open. I created an NDA for the mistress. If she was to come into the picture at all, she would be exposed to certain terms that would ethically and legally prevent her from claiming anything. Not out of spite, out of precision. I also cultivated allies. Zoe, my daughter, despite her eye-rolling at my thrift store coat, found herself sitting on the edge of a bed late one night, listening to me explain the concept of stewardship. It's not about control, I said. It's about protecting the hands that will hold this after me. Zoe's eyes were wet. Mom, she whispered, I always thought you were soft. I see now you were building. Desmond compiled the audit and found a paper trail that would make a courtroom hush. He found transfers that would be hard, though not impossible, to explain. A wire to a boutique in Miami, a deposit to a Shell LLC, a string of payments to someone identified in the memos only as M. He pulled county records that showed the deed structure and the trustee documents I had executed. He helped me craft a quiet legal instrument. A trustee's directive that would, in the event of an attempt to transfer the property, automatically freeze any account deemed to be collusive. I began to prepare the moment. I rehearsed how to hold a room without speaking harshly, how to let a legal document land like a bell. I practiced the sort of soft smile that would say, I am not the woman you thought I was. And when the day of Jamal's graduation, Marcus's chosen battlefield arrived, I was ready. They expected theatrics. I planned grace. The backyard was a stage. White tents, ribboned bouquets, the makeshift podium that people had set for speeches. Cousins arrived in sequins and silk, neighbors with cameras, the pastor who could make any sentence sound like scripture. Marcus wore a jacket he thought made him look regal. Yvonne, cheeks rouged, arranged her pearls like she was ready for victory. They had invited the city's social set because spectacle validated them. I stood at the edge of the tent, feeling the July heat like a benediction. Jamal, my son with a wide grin and a future I had financed, threw his cap in the air. People cheered. Marcus hugged him like the father he wanted to be seen as. Then came the part they had planned. After the last toast, after the formal blessings, Marcus would take me aside with a flourish, produce the amendment, and watch as I signed my life away for the sake of family unity. When he moved toward me, I smiled. I did not flinch. Maya, he said, the family needs to come together. We need to sign the trust amendment now so we can move forward. For Jamal's future, it's time. He handed me an envelope with the flourish of a man who believed he held power. The envelope felt like a napkin, decorative, inconsequential. Inside was the amendment he had drafted and a press note that smelled faintly of perfume. Not mine, not from home. I set the envelope down on the edge of the table. Then I asked for 5 minutes alone with Jamal. I walked him into the kitchen and we sat on a stoop of tile. "You know I love you," I said softly. "I have always wanted to give you freedom." He nodded, confused, but trusting. I told him the truth, not in the dramatic way television does, but in the quiet, unshakable voice of someone who has built an ark out of whispered prayers. I told him about the trust, about the covenants his grandmother wanted, about the reason the house was safe. When I returned to the tent, I asked for the microphone on the pretense of giving a blessing. People quieted, cameras angled. Marcus looked pleased. He thought he would usher me into a corner to be handled. Instead, I lifted the microphone and spoke. "Thank you, everyone, for being here for Jamal," I said. "It means more than you'll ever know. There are a few things I should clear up, and I want to be transparent because family deserves that. For a long time, I chose silence because I hoped people would learn. But when actions threaten the legacy of those who came before us, silence becomes complicity. A murmur. I let it gather. Elsie May taught me that a home is not an asset to be liquidated at the whims of appetite," I continued. "So I set up a trust to protect this house, to ensure it carries us forward. I am the trustee. The deed is recorded with the county, and it requires unanimous family consent and a judicial review to be changed. Any attempt to transfer ownership or coerce a sale without that consent is null and will be met with legal action." My voice did not break. It was steady, like a bell. I felt Marcus's jaw work. Yvonne's expression tightened. People blinked. Then I did something I had prepared for weeks. I called Desmond to the podium. He stood, papers in hand, and quietly read the audit aloud, transactions, dates, and the way money had moved out of family accounts into unknown places. I played a recorded excerpt of a voicemail Marcus had left on a business number, thin evidence of conversations that would look worse under cross-examination. "I have a fiduciary duty to the trust," Desmond said into the mic, then turned to Marcus. "As of this moment, the Thompson Family Legacy Trust will freeze any disbursement tied to the Maple Street property until a judicial review can determine whether undue influence occurred. Any party attempting to circumvent this will be referred to council." You could have heard a pin drop. Marcus's face went pale in a way that no amount of bronzer could hide. Yvonne gasped. Conversations that had been whispered were now exposed to noon sun. Cousins who had sat enjoying punch now shifted in chairs, realizing there was more to the story than the rumors had allowed. Marcus's anger flicked on like a faulty neon sign. "This is a stunt," he spat. "You can't do this in front of our family." "I can," I said, with a clarity that felt like an axe-cutting rope. "Because I am the trustee, because the deed is recorded, because your actions are on record. When you began moving money into accounts labeled consulting and lifestyle, the trust set up protective measures. They can be activated at any time when suspicious transfers are detected." I watched the crowd reframe their understanding in real time. The man they had admired seemed suddenly very human. Then, with deliberate calm, I handed envelopes to Marcus and Yvonne, eviction notices for the guest wing, a notice of ceased access to any account where unauthorized transfers had been made, and a request for immediate accounting of all expenditures. I watched Marcus stumble through the paper the way a dancer missteps. He had always thought he could step on the stage and be the hero. "You still have options," I said softly. "Admit the misuse, provide full accounting, return the assets that belong to the trust. We can seek reconciliation, or we can litigate." Their panic was a poor fit for their evening wear. The mistress, if she existed, and if she heard any of it from the grapevine, was suddenly an uncomfortable omen. The town's congregation, once ready to celebrate, now watched the social drama convert into legal consequence. No raised voice, no scandalous shouting match, no theatrics beyond the slow unspooling of truth. The crowd watched the elegant collapse. That was the point. I didn't have to break them with rage. The law and the quiet dignity of a woman who had built a contingency plan did the work. After the speeches, the tents folded like paper. People drifted away with hushed gossip. Marcus tried to speak to me in the driveway, voice low and urgent, but I let the car idle and watched him from behind the wheel. He pleaded with gestures, bargaining like he could barter remorse into a signature. He offered a promise that sounded like hollow coins. Yvonne wrung her hands and begged forgiveness. The same woman who had borrowed and never repaid now offering a chorus of contrition. They called me ungrateful. They said I had humiliated them in front of the whole neighborhood. They flung accusations that made the air sour. Zoe cried in my arms because the family had been torn apart in a way that hurt her sense of safety. Jamal, caught in the crossfire of parents who had mismanaged trust and a mother who had to enforce it, stood with eyes that looked older than his years. I did not gloat. I did not relish their collapse. My pleasure was minimal, more like a clean resolve. I had protected what mattered: the legacy, the safety, the ability for Jamal and future Thompsons to use that space as a foundation rather than a commodity. When Marcus begged, his words were thin, and I felt nothing for the man who had refused to be who he promised. They begged. They wrote letters. They sent texts that started with, "Maya, please." Yvonne sent a fruit basket with a note that said, "I'm sorry." Marcus tried to sign a document that he thought would undo everything, an admission he wanted to file privately. I consulted with counsel. We mediated a path forward that would require full accounting, restitution, and counseling. There were legal steps to heal the wound and steps to ensure the family's future was not built on fraud. They tried to backpedal and claim they only wanted to secure a future. My response was a calm refusal to accept excuses instead of action. The trust required restitution and a plan to prevent recurrence. Marcus agreed to financial counseling and to a public accounting. Yvonne agreed to return the heirlooms she had sold and offered to apologize in front of the family at the next gathering. They negotiated through counsel because the stage had shifted from gossip to procedure. I sat in church the next Sunday with a strange lightness. People who had been in the tent now watched from the pews. Some avoided me, embarrassed by loyalty misaligned. Others came and took my hand in blessing, offering a word. "You did what was right." I felt that blessing in the soft place between my ribs, where years of bearing had left a pocket of resilience. I moved out of the house a few weeks later, not in a dramatic fleeing, but in a planned retreat. I had arranged a small cottage by a river in another county, a place with windows that held morning light. I sold extra trinkets, donated clothes I no longer needed, and kept the keys to Maple Street. I wanted distance, not vengeance. The house remained in trust, a shelter for future Thompsons and a monument to boundary as a form of love. Zoe stayed, or at least commuted. Jamal came by for dinners that had fewer interruptions and more truth. Marcus participated in the accounting process and slowly faced things he had outsourced to ego. Yvonne began a daily practice of church and community service that felt sincere because now it was matched with responsibility. My days turned toward spiritual healing. I started each morning with breath and prayer, winding through gratitude lists rather than grievance. I took up watercolor painting because my hands needed a gentler discipline than contracts. I joined a women's circle where we spoke of inherited trauma and how to break it. We said the names of ancestors and found patterns: pride, survival, silence. We named the way women of our line had been the silent keepers and vowed to teach the next generation how to steward both assets and themselves. The legal matters lingered like stitches, but they were stitches that held. The audit had been filed. Marcus had offered restitution. Yvonne had returned 2 heirlooms and offered to fund a scholarship in Elsie May's name at the local church. These were small restorations that felt like part of a larger justice. Every now and then someone would ask, "Weren't you lonely?" There is loneliness in being the person who lays out truth in broad daylight, but there is also freedom. I dressed my days in quiet dignity. I smiled when neighbors stopped by, and I did not pretend the past did not hurt. I let it rest like a healed scar, visible but not raw. One evening, sitting on the porch of the cottage, watching the sun make ribbons on the river, I took out a small box. Inside were letters my grandmother had written to me, blunt, loving, practical. I read, "You will know when your kindness has been used. Do not be ashamed to build a wall where your ancestors built bridges. A bridge can collapse if used too often by those who refuse to carry their share." I wept then, not for loss, but for the long story of women who had to learn hard lessons to protect those who followed. When Jamal walked through the door later that week with a college acceptance letter and a grin too wide for his face, I hugged him and felt the whole arc of what I had done settle into place. He was looking at his future from a foundation that would not be sold underneath him. That was the point. To the women watching, especially those of us who have spent decades giving, know that protecting peace sometimes requires building a legal line and standing firm in the light. The strong black woman trope has been weaponized against us for too long. Strength is also the wisdom to plan, to set boundaries, and to let the law do what kindness cannot. I kept my faith. I kept my dignity. I used both to do something radical, protect our legacy, and choose peace. If you're here for more stories of women who move with quiet power, you already know how this ends for those who choose to do the work. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Tell me if you've ever had to protect something that mattered by any means necessary. And remember, grace does not equal helplessness. Grace can be the most effective armor of all.